I'd say there's magic in the enablement structure, product definition, and all of the human activity that we pay attention to around the AI. The AI is not the hard part in what we do. If you're going to go drive efficiency or effectiveness into the middle of a workflow, and you think that the speed at which the middle of that workflow is going to, take place is just going to happen magically without the I Love Lucy effect on the conveyor belt on the other side, you're crazy. You have to go set expectations on who's providing inputs and how outputs are being received in order for the humans on either side to make sure they are also now aware and ready or can accommodate the change and the benefits associated with what you're putting in.
Hey everyone, welcome to this Humans of AI podcast where we speak with enterprise leaders on how AI is transforming business and what tangible outcomes they're seeing with AI. We're super excited to have with us today Eric. Eric is the head of AI at Cox. Cox obviously is the
third largest cable provider in North America.
Before that, Eric was a MD and partner at Accenture. At Cox, you have productionized almost 50 plus AI applications, 17x ROI in a year and a half. You've kind of rolled out AI literacy to 2,000 plus folks, and you've kind of approached almost like 1,000 plus citizen developers in the last year. I was just curious, when you think of this, how do you think of prioritizing a roadmap of what comes first, or do these things happen parallelly? Would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love how we're diving right in. This is exciting. So there's a couple of foundational elements relative to how we addressed some of this stuff in the beginning, and then ultimately the strategy unfolded in ways that seemed to be most logical, like we would have thought about anything else. But those building blocks that we created in the beginning ultimately allowed us to not only control the activity that we were pushing out, the value that was surrounding it, but also the expectations that came with it. And so what that was in the beginning was we were given direction by our leadership team to not go explore 1,000 things at once. We needed to focus on the 10 things that would provide value. And while you say we've got 50 plus things that are in production, I want everybody to know that those things come in various forms and sizes. Some things are small but producing value, some things are large and producing value, and some things are combinations of things that ultimately have to be put together in order to produce value. And so part of what I just described is embedded in the strategy that we laid out in the beginning, which is we wanted our AI organization and the way in which we enabled the rest of the organization to build to be product focused, not project focused. And what that means is if you're going to go build something that takes more than 3 months, we tell you you're probably building the wrong thing. If you want to go build something that can't be discretely defined or discretely controlled or even easily replaced or easily defined in terms of expectations of both use and value, then you're ultimately looking at the wrong thing or too big of a thing to manage your way through from an AI perspective. And so when you think about those levels of controls and our ability to say yes or no to the way everybody in the company was looking at deploying or building their use case, it not only drove focus, but it helped clarify expectations around the thing, what we wanted of the thing that we were building, and how we were going to define or extract value from those things. And then a team of experts helped guide or control or enable the way those things were built. And so much of those building blocks ultimately landed us on the focus that we needed, the way to define both product and expectations for the AI things that we built. And then we focus a lot, and this will resonate with you, Binny, quite a bit, just given what you do. We pay attention to the human aspects of the change required for the AI to be successful as well on the other side of it. And so we have a lot of expectations management discussions with, hey, if you're going to go drive efficiency or effectiveness into the middle of a workflow, and you think that the speed at which the middle of that workflow is going to, take place is just going to happen magically without the I Love Lucy effect on the conveyor belt on the other side, you're crazy. You have to go set expectations on who's providing inputs and how outputs are being received in order for the humans on either side to make sure they are also now aware and ready, or can accommodate the change and the benefits associated with what you're putting in. So I know that was enough or a lot just to get rolling, but there's I'd say there's magic in the enablement structure, product definition, and all of the human activity that we pay attention to around the AI. The AI is not the hard part in what we do.
You spoke about it. I really like the whole well-bounded thing, saying if you can't go build something in 90 days, then you're probably framing the solution of the problem not very well. And when you say if you can't go and build, right, Eric, does that refer to citizen developers building their own workflows, or how do you decide who builds what? Does the team build it? Does the vendor build it? Does the business unit build it? How does that decision get made?
Yeah, I think so. There's not much in forms of who, as it goes, right? Because the guardrails that we put in place, right? We knew from the beginning that we wanted to enable a citizen development factory, if you will. And that factory is really represented by, any one of our colleagues that wants to show up and build an agent. We've given them a platform and a playground in which they can go build either productivity machines or systems that help them on their own, serve as an educational or experiential thing for them on their journey, or are things that they're truly putting into production that will drive productivity benefits for them, for their teams, et cetera. And with that came some guardrails, right? And the guardrails looked like this. If your workflow or your application doesn't connect to our enterprise, mission critical systems, if you have a low number of users, if the data that you're going to use is yours, and if you don't need a budget, then we allow you to go freely develop what those agents look like. Now, keep in mind that in the platform that we have provided everybody access to, my team has ultimate observability and monitoring and controls over what's in that platform. So we look at the workflows, we force everybody through a proxy and a gateway so that we see the in and out, the ingress and egress of their LLM calls, et cetera. And so they can go do those things. As soon as you start to move in that four-dimensional cube across the parameters that I set, you need more users, you need more data that's maybe confidential, you need integration with a system or so, then we ask you to come review those explicitly with my team or our AI council, and then we give you guidance. And then, there's ultimately some things that are just reserved for not necessarily more experienced AI development, but a team of folks that's going to put the right type of systems in place to ensure that if this thing breaks, it's not going to disrupt the business. And so within that construct and all of the reference architecture and patterns that we've built, the who building it doesn't necessarily matter. It's more about governance as an enabling function, and then people following the rules that are going to go do those things.
Makes sense. Okay. And you have famously said enterprise AI succeeds or fails on people and not models, right? And then you indicated I might have some interest on the human part of that as well. And how did that idea first come? Like in the sense, what was the origin of that observation or that idea?
Yeah, I think that we've got. I've had the luxury of a fairly experienced team within this space, right? And that comes either from a product management perspective with AI experience, AI engineering, research and development, infrastructure and scaling. The team that we've got is interdisciplinary within the AI realm and very, very expert level. And so as we set out early to go build some of the things that we were building, what we found was, so long as you set expectations of the thing, and this goes back to the product strategy that we laid out, you will typically find success with the AI portion of what it's going to produce, right? That goes back to, if you define a very large nebulous system that doesn't have explicit goals or path or direction or guardrails, it's going to wander, on its path to get there. And that's where some of the surprises are going to show up. And so what we found was, as we built things, we didn't have trouble getting the AI to produce what we were looking for it to produce, because we were defining it in a constrained enough way that let us build momentum and grow the expectation that we had. And it also provided us the learnings that if you want a value of 5, don't go build a 5, go build a 1 and a 1 in close enough proximity within a function, and then put those two things together in a workflow and have 1 + 1 = 5. That's how you get to 5. And ultimately, through the conversations, we saw the people that were using these capabilities start to react and learn through how, to manage their expectations differently, or to understand that 80% accuracy was a high benchmark, or to understand that the way they did their job was going to change, not be replaced, but change because they had a new coworker in the fray that was just producing outputs or consuming inputs at a clip that we couldn't previously comprehend. And so it was very easy to see that the human elements of the things around the AI that we're putting in place were ultimately the constraints, but those constraints can be solved for through support, education, and inspiration.
Very interesting. So large part of it is kind of aligning the human expectations with what the AI does, right? Which makes a lot of sense. Which is, as humans, if you're used to traditional software, it either works or it doesn't. This whole thing about it's 80% accurate, 70% accurate is a whole new mental construct for somebody who's dealing with software.
Yeah, but also in conjunction with what you just said, if you take the AI paradigm relative to how things are created relative to SaaS software, most of the time when the SaaS software doesn't work, right? As in what you just said, what that means is it doesn't work according to my expectations. Now, there's two ways in which your expectations manifest in SaaS software. You're either getting what you want out of the SaaS product off the shelf, or you have teams that are configuring or customizing your expectations into it. But in one of those situations, you really don't have control. You have control over selection, but you can't tell the SaaS product how they want to function in their base product. You can only set your expectations relative to custom and config after the fact, right? Within AI, there's no base product to set expectations for. It's all config and custom. And so if the AI isn't working to your expectations, then what I tell you is that you haven't been clear enough with your expectations in the construction of the AI, which means a human problem, not an AI problem.
Right. That's a great point as well. And to your point about education as well, which is there is a world of difference between writing a prompt into ChatGPT and writing a well-structured prompt with evals to get something very bounded when you're interacting with the model directly.
That's right. But yeah, like the most salient way that I describe to people what you just said is if you're using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, like you use Google, then there's no way you're going to get out of it what you want, right? It's a different paradigm altogether. And there's a Goldilocks moment that you have to be patient on your journey to find, right? Because too little information in the prompt or the context is not enough. You're not going to get what you want. And if you give it too much context, you're literally going to get back what you put in. Somewhere in the middle is that Goldilocks zone that gets you what you want, and it's trial and error to shapeshift the inputs in order to get the desired outputs.
Right. No, that's actually a fantastic point you make, Eric, because there is this so much focus on data being important for AI. And, for the kind of the uninformed folks, it almost feels as if more data and more context is better, but not really. It's just the right context at the right point is really what you need, not like more.
Yeah, and that goes back to this notion that everyone thinks you need harmony in your data, clean enterprise data. This unicorn moment that no company on the planet has found. Like nobody's got a clean data real estate, right? That's why data organizations and chief data officers exist, because they're on a never-ending journey, like our CISOs, to find nirvana, right? And so again, you go back to the benefits of this productized nature of our strategy. If you're defining expectations on a small enough basis and making big things out of a lot of small things, the data that you need for each of those small things, whether they be an agent or a prompt or whatever it might be, then the quality of the data as an input is a lot easier to control, cleanse, modify, change on the way in, change on the way out. But if you're looking at the macro level, how do you go clean all of your enterprise data to get one AI function to work? It's not going to happen.
Right. I have two follow-on questions since on topics you just said. One was, since we spoke about, you compared the SaaS versus AI and people building their own stuff, and this whole narrative going on in the stock market, because of which all the SaaS stocks are getting crushed. And one part of the narrative is that enterprises will replace their SaaS; they'll just wipe code it with AI. What are you seeing on the ground? Is that just a narrative? Is there any legs to that thing?
Yeah, so it's no different than when the SaaS products came in and they replaced the human workforce, the human process within the workforce, right? Imagine before Salesforce, you had massive manual paper-based processes where people would walk into the office with their sales orders. Someone would then go type those sales orders onto a form, and then those forms would get input into, and so on and so forth. And then Salesforce showed up and they said, no, 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 just define your opportunity. We'll help you through, the opportunity stages in your sales process, and then we'll help you manage this at scale, right? If everything changed. The same thing is probably happening. The question that everybody should be asking is not if it's going to replace, and I'm not talking about Salesforce in particular. You asked a question about SaaS in general. It's not whether or not this revolution with AI is going to have an effect like SaaS did on human process before. The question is how long and how entrenched, because everybody knows that all enterprises live at different grades of maturity, different grades of capability, different needs at different times, different levels of customization, et cetera. And so is everybody going out and replacing their SaaS software today? No. The market reacted because they see the potential, and that's what happens in the market, and that's why there's fluctuations. And there are companies that are replacing elements of their SaaS products, modules within their SaaS products. But some companies may have found success in wholesale replacing a SaaS product or two. But again, those are very tip of the sphere examples within a wide view of enterprise that has different needs and different capabilities. And so will it happen? Maybe 100%. I don't know. I don't think so. But question is, how long will it take to have a meaningful effect on the bottom line? But then I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that it's been amazing to also watch the SaaS companies react to what may or may not be quote unquote inevitable, right? Salesforce just announced as an example that they're going to do what they have said they wouldn't do prior. At least I think they said they wouldn't do prior, which is they're going to run their platform completely headless and say, we will be a system of record, and we will maintain the sanctity of what core value prop we have. The magic of what Salesforce provides on top with the experience and the UI and everything else that comes with it, given their data cloud capabilities and marketing cloud and service and sales cloud, all that stuff is great. But if you are an enterprise that happens to be on the other side of maturity relative to building your own AI agents, or you allow your teams to go do more advanced things, use us as your system of record and come on in. What the commercial model looks like and how all that stuff works is still TBD, right? But they're at least saying, no, we see the future too, and that's why this headless thing now exists.
Makes sense. So one part of replacing SaaS is replacing SaaS with AI equivalent of SaaS. The other part of replacing SaaS is a company saying, hey, why should I pay Salesforce $500,000 a year? It's really easy to code using Claude Code right now. I'm going to spend $50,000, clone it, and own my own Salesforce. Do you think that is a trend that you're seeing might happen?
I think it's a micro trend right now, and what's happening is at least from my vantage point, right? And I have some empirical evidence of this, but you've got a team of people that happen to have the right intersection of software engineering, AI development experience, or AI engineering experience, and the function expertise that you need to replace that SaaS tool, right? So whatever the SaaS be, let's call it, a CRM function. It doesn't have to be Salesforce because there's many of them out there. If you have somebody that says, I can go replace opportunity management within my CRM, they know enough about that. It's going to cost you, it's going to cost them, somewhere on the order of magnitude of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in token consumption to get that module up and running in an enterprise grade and usable way that meets the expectations of all of the people that have been using that SaaS product for how long? And so then the question then becomes, have you thought through what it means to put that one module into production that still has to operate in conjunction with the rest of the CRM that you have from the SaaS provider? And do you have the right type of AI ops support capabilities, monitoring, observability, scaling and infrastructure, like all of those things, security, integration, like there's a whole host of rebuilding call it a flanker IT function, right? That has now tier one mission critical application processes being built next to your real estate. That's a lot that you have to think through before you can just say, I'm going to vibe code my way through an opportunity management system. So is it happening? Yep, it's happening. I don't know that people have found or companies have found the sweet spot yet relative to how to go affect that level of change and how to get the CIOs and CTOs of the day comfortable with what's happening and how it'll be interoperable within the context of we still have to run a business. And if that thing fails or breaks or goes awry and there's no SaaS product to fall back on, then what?
That makes a lot of sense, which is, if you have the bandwidth and the tokens to do on something, why go fix something that's already working? Let's invest that into something new, net new stuff, right?
Yeah, so Benny, it's interesting because even here, what I find myself telling people all the time is just because you can go do it doesn't mean you should. Right? It's a very basic premise because there's 100 things that we can go build to offset spend within software today. Should we be using our precious dollars and tokens to go rebuild our CRM of the day, our people management system of the day, our ERP, or should we be going after the long tail of costs that's represented by instances of this and custom things of that? Like that's where all of your cost efficiencies are going to sit, not going to replace wholesale SaaS software yet, right? But that long tail also represents a meaningful build of momentum and experience that you need in order to go after the bigger thing. So take that as the parallel to 1 + 1 = 5. 1 + 1 over here is the 5 experience that you need to go do the bigger things later.
Mm-hmm. That's well said. Yeah. So when you productionize 50 workflows or applications, and then you have ROI in the range of 10 to 17x, where do you see most of the pull, Eric, in terms of, if you take the top 10% of those 50 apps that are being adopted, what kind of workflows or business unit kind of problems do you see the most pull?
Yeah, so we had the benefit in the beginning. So our leadership team set out for us not only with the desire to focus, right, and that came with what we did and what we enabled, but somewhere in the conversation, it was not explicit, but it played out to an openness to address not just the efficiency AI that everybody's going after, but also growth. Growth AI as a balance to what you're looking at as efficiency also provides a statement to the organization that you're not just here to replace humans. In fact, that's not on the agenda at all. And so we laid out our AI strategy and where we focused into 4 different categories. One was growth. We have AI applications that are driving top line benefits. We look at experience, so the things that may not necessarily contribute to a direct interaction, like our customers may not be using it, although in some cases they are. Think about things like generative-based chatbots, voice agents, et cetera. But all of the other elements that play into enabling a better customer experience are in play. And then there is, yes, a category of efficiency AI. And we have found not just efficiency for the sake of cost reduction, but efficiency for the sake of 10xing our employees so they can be more productive and accomplish more that we couldn't do in the past. And I'll give you some examples of that. And then there's, of course, a whole foundational component where not just platforms, but agents and workflows all have to be put in place to support and enable not just the ecosystem I described, but also provide the enablement functions and features that people need to use in order to go build on top of. So you would say, hey, what's an example of an efficiency AI that isn't a replacement function for an employee, right? We have somebody who sits, I would say, in the middle of business and engineering. They work on our network teams. And what we found was through our monitoring of token consumption, he was one of the higher consumers of cost. Like we don't say higher spenders. We don't say token burners or whatever you call them. Like he's consuming more, right? Because our assumption is he's producing more. And so when you hit the top of this list, we go have a conversation with you and we say, hey, we're just curious what you're doing, because there's probably goodness in education that we can then give to other people as examples of what they can be doing to be productive, right? Sometimes, we may find that they're not doing something they should, but then it becomes an enabling function of how can we help modify this a little bit to get you on a path to right, doing the same thing that you're doing. And so we went and talked to this one gent, and he says, let me show you something. And he pulls up on his monitor, a bunch of spreadsheets and a bunch of OneNote tabs and notes, etc. And it was a hodgepodge of stuff, right? You could just tell that there was this like amalgamation of to do that had probably existed for a long time. And he says all of this represents what is effectively a 2-year backlog of stuff that I've had to do that I just can't get to because my job gets in the way or other priorities get in the way or the fire drill of the day, et cetera. He said, so over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I burned through, X tokens. I got through this entire backlog. The entire, I said, the entire thing. He goes, the entire thing. He said, I woke up 2 days ago. I came to work and I had no to-do list. And then he looked at me and he said, do you know what kind of critical thinking you have to be able to produce to figure out what to do when you have no one telling you what to do? And I said, man, that's amazing. And so that's an example of a 10X employee that is now producing an output that we could never get from him before, even though he's a high performer, and now testing his limits because he's operating against no to-do list, no instruction. He's going to collaborate with his business partners or his engineering partners on what they can do next, not what they need to do next. Whole different ballgame.
Right. I agree. It just frees them up to think more strategically. So in your career, Eric, you've done consulting, you've had roles, P&L leading roles on sales, marketing, digital transformation. Do you think when you look back and connect the dots, they all come together to this moment of getting you ready to be a head of AI at a large enterprise?
Yeah, I think there's certain benefits to the experience that I have as an expert generalist. I like to tell people that I have unapologetic range. Sometimes that's not necessarily welcome because I think the world over the last 25 years and a lot of consulting, maybe not all of it, but a lot of consulting, to an effect, demanded some specialization because that's where a lot of the value sits at the bottom of your expertise. So yes, I would say in one form of my job, that generalist experience that I have certainly set me up to go do and drive the value across the landscape that we have within this company. And I'm sure there are other companies like that out there, but there are other heads of AI that have slightly different remits where the expertise and the needs are pushed out into more of a federated or fragmented approach or op model that says someone needs to be defining standards for use and then everybody else goes and figures out how to do it. I can operate in both of those worlds. And so that's where some of the background comes in. What I don't have is an entrenched background in machine learning, right? Like I don't have a data science background, but I've, in my experience, both here at Cox and in consulting, run digital and data transformation programs. I've done the machine learning programs and projects. I've helped define the needs and the approach to using predictive models to achieve benefits. But just like I was a developer 25 years ago, and it's been 25 years since I've written a line of code, I never built a machine learning model in my early form career. But that doesn't mean that I can't understand and apply those concepts in the job that I'm in now, and ultimately help people understand how this works, how you put it in conjunction with the other things around it, and then go drive value from it. And so I think there's been great benefit in terms of how I got to where I am from my experience, but I don't think it's the only way to get here. I think there's a lot of different paths that lead to success in a role like I have.
Right. No, it makes sense because unlike I guess the AI wave, at least it seems like business teams and tech teams come together a lot more. And then given your consulting background where it's very customer focused, customers first, I can see how that mindset is super valuable in a AI first environment like this.
Yeah. I think there's an extension of everything that came before this, right? Like whether you look at the general digital revolution, the birth of software development in the .com boom and accessibility on what the internet brought to us, or what the cloud offered in terms of scale and deployment that allowed workloads to operate in forms that they would never able to operate before. Now what's happening is you have all of that plus, because it doesn't matter what job function you're in. It doesn't matter what you do, where you do, how you do, why you do. Every one of those things around the wheel can have a multiplying effect. And it's not just cloud. It's not just the network. It's without the cloud and without the internet and without SaaS, I can still now go build software and productivity in this environment for me and my teams to use that can operate successfully with or without all of that stuff, right? So when you find the combination of all those things, that's and the ultimate access to the capabilities that sit now in front of everybody is when you can start to see the potential. And what I'm trying to promote is that instead of the doomsday scenarios where many people think that the jobs are going to go away, you have to take a couple of things that are happening now and what is somewhere embedded in what some economist can tell you somewhere, because I'm not an econ guy, right? But basic principles tell me that if you look at the job market, I've read and have heard other people talk about the fact that there are more software engineering jobs right now than there were pre-COVID, right? So if AI is doing more quote unquote damage to software development as a form than anything else, but there's more jobs available, it's a head scratcher, right? What I'm also reading is that much of the impact relative to what is happening with Gen Z in the workforce today is not related to AI. It's actually related to remote work policies. That's the barrier for a lot of these folks to find jobs coming out of college. That's a different problem, right? At the end of the day, though, if you look at the potential for AI in the universe that it exists in as a force multiplier for production, what that means is supply will go through the roof. And it's supply of. It doesn't matter what it is, supply will go through the roof. And when supply goes through the roof, what happens to price? It starts to decline. And so whether it's accessibility to AI, whether it's consumption of the things that you need, it's going to be a bit of a normalizer instead of a disruptor relative to what is happening in the economy, in my opinion. The question is, how long does it take to hit a meaningful point of saturation before people realize, oh, this is not a bad thing. We're all worried about this innate fear of either what we don't know or this doomsday apocalyptic AGI-based thing that is going to enslave us all. And I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you, Eric, which is I'm on the optimistic camp of it is going to generate a lot more jobs, because there's going to be, just like you rightly said, there's going to be this on the demand side, there's going to be this explosion of use cases that's going to be needed, just like in your case, 50 plus, productized agents. And then maybe what a developer does on a day-to-day basis is going to change. They're going to be developer plus product manager plus designer. But then the number of those folks needed, seems like it is going to go up. Maybe there'll be some short-term pain in some pockets. That's kind of where I land as well.
A great example that sits at the intersection of what I said and what you just said is whether it's the right thing to do or not is to be determined by you or your company. But if everybody can now get what they need, think about the potential for many engineers to be required to help those people build software or get productivity suites or find pathways to making them more productive in the outputs. You're monetizing the outputs, you're creating jobs to help produce the inputs. Like there's a new cycle of life and value that sits on the other side of this thing that has to be, you have to sift through the clouds of fear relative to what might happen and embrace the potential for what you want to happen. And then go channel your effort, your focus, and your value attainment to the things that you want. If you keep thinking about the negative, you'll find yourself there.
Yeah, a fantastic point. Again, I'm totally aligned with, you brought the topic of life and value. It makes a lot of sense to me as well, which is I feel that every successive wave of technology almost always lets humans, slightly get unshackled from this work they have to do versus the stuff that they want to do. And AI is that significant provides you significant leverage, like you said, to go and do what you're meant to do, while the AI takes care of all the drudgery and all the other stuff that you don't want to do.
I find it interesting, the paradox is for the most part, most people complain about their jobs, right? They don't want to do the mundane tasks. They don't want to deal with the repetition. They don't want to deal with the this and that. They don't want to tailor their thing for the next person, et cetera. And then when you give them a tool that helps eliminate all of the frustration in their job, they say they don't want it because it's going to take their job. It's a fun paradox to roll around with over a beer with your friends.
Yeah. I think this the hype around. I sometimes I'm not sure where to land on. Should the AI labs, should they have hyped this so much? It helps because it helps with the adoption, but then the flip side to it is the whole pessimism around, is it going to take away the jobs and things like that. So we don't know.
Yeah, good. That's another good one to debate. And good luck staying away from the capitalistic nature of the country that supports the infrastructure these guys are operating on. So, uh, driving adoption beyond their potential is almost it's an innate goal for people at this point in this country.
You also have said that most enterprise AI activity is just activity, the ones that ship as maturity. What would be the top one or two patterns you've seen in the use cases that hit production versus POC?
So here's an example of where I think there can be an unlock relative to moving past activity and into scaled value in production. Whether you're giving people access to platforms that can, that can support their efforts to build agents, or people are just building agents because they have access to things like Cowork or Codex or whatever. Most employees, most people that I talk to in non-IT organizations, in companies out there, all say we have the ability to go, create some of this stuff if we're lucky, but we have no place to deploy these things, right? Production, like my laptop has become production for the most part for the things that I go build. Not me, but that's what I hear, out there. And what I think we need to start moving towards is, the elements of control that IT organizations or CIOs or CSOs are looking for are born in walled gardens that operate as production environments for people that are not in IT to go deploy their functions to, so that they can be used and operate at a scale with the right controls and guardrails built in at the environment level. Because you don't want to have to tell people, here's the 73 environment variables that I need everybody to go do when everybody builds their agent. You want to put them in a place where there's 73 environment variables and the security parameters around it are built into the way they operate. Then you can sleep at night while people are building and learning and doing what they want. And so I think that's certainly one element of it. And then I think you have to take into account that once you get past the literacy component, once you get past the fact that leaders in general have to demonstrate publicly their support for their people to go do and explore these things to find productivity, then I think you have to get people to understand what we talked about earlier, which is it doesn't matter if you're on my team and building at enterprise scale, you have to productize your own use case. You have to think about how to go about this and demonstrate the patience on the journey, to not think that you're going to get the output on the first try, that you can avoid being your own product manager and project manager, engineer and QA at the same time. Like this cyclical notion that I've talked about in the past that says project managers are finding their path into being product managers because they're having to contribute more and can contribute more to these life cycles, while product managers are building and testing and fixing more with their engineers, and the engineers are managing sets of agents instead of building them or instead of writing code now. And so they're becoming more project management oriented. And if you follow that circle around and around and around, what you find is that it starts to get into a smaller and smaller and smaller set where it just rationalizes to one person. Like the old 2 pizza box teams is now a pizza slice team. And that pizza slice team and that one person is a project, product, and engineering manager all at the same time, executing all of those functions on a small enough scale where that person and the 50 people next to them can operate in a spec-driven environment that allows scale and creation that we've never seen before with great efficiencies. It doesn't mean we're getting rid of project managers or product managers. We're just evolving their roles and their functions to contribute to the lifecycle in a very different way. And those engineers that exist from that rationalization of what I just described will also exist on a bit of an experience ladder, because you'll have folks that can do bigger, more complex things, and you'll have people that are just learning and working their way up. And all along the way, the sets of experience that come from the core functions like engineering or product or project management will still have to be infused. But depending on what people's proclivity or core desire are, that's where you'll find some differentiation within the stack, but it doesn't excuse you from having to do all three of those things at once.
Well, it's very well said. Earlier, when we spoke, you kind of referred to the AI skills operating layer that you're kind of building, where you're decomposing certain tasks into reusable skills. Could you talk a little more about it? What is the genesis of the idea? Where are you seeing it working? Where do you see it going from here?
The short story is we've seen value in the products that we've built in a specific function. In this case, it's in a marketing context. And based on some of the bigger enterprise capabilities we put in place, and what we saw when we surrounded those capabilities with citizen development functions within the workflow, the combination of all those things was operating at great harmony. And so we looked at it and we said, well, why don't we take a certain segment, not up into, call it upmarket, white glove type marketing and sales activities, but mass distribution of prospecting, media, and digital e-commerce. There can be an agentic harness that's wrapped around all of the tools that we have, so long as we provide the markdown library for consumption of AI, right? Like I like to say that markdown libraries are the buffet that AI wants to eat at. And you have to get your functional, technical, and tacit knowledge represented in that fashion so that when the agentic function exists or operates, it has the context that it needs to not drift. It understands how to measure at every step along the way, the accuracy measures that it has to stick to, or the rules that it has to follow, or where it can be, creative and find optionality in how it goes and achieves its goals. In order to create that library of skills and tacit knowledge, you have to have all of that stuff represented in either, Claude skills and or tacit material. But ultimately, you want people operating in an IDE as an example, right? Because you want them interacting with these things in a way that they can build and test either skills or units in a controlled and deployable way that follows, environment promotion and other. And so while we say, in marketing, we're not going to take engineers out of engineering and make them into marketers, we can take marketers and give them 10% of knowledge to become marketing engineers and then amplify the value they produce. But there are a lot of people that are still just not ready to dive into an IDE, to get into Claude Code and do the things that we want them to do. And so we built a thing called Skill Studio. And what that allows for is, with representation of our orchestration layer and the environment that it operates in, there's a Claude MD file that says, here's how all of this stuff works, and here's where the skills libraries sit, and here's all the interactive components within these workflows, et cetera. And so when a business user comes in, they go to Skill Studio, they have their Claude MD file downloaded from the environment, and they can start to pick and choose either the required or optional skills that are used by the harness in the execution of the workflow, and they can take those and individually modify them, and then they can assess using AI not only the quality of the skill that they wrote, but they can then test the individual skill with its own little harness to see how it will operate and produce whatever desired outcome there might be, because it has awareness of what the entire environment looks like. And then when in this UI that is not code, it's just markdown on the left and a skill representation in display form on the right with some buttons and some drop downs that allow them to navigate these features, they're able to build and test their skills in the context of the workflow within their own little harness. And then when they're done, because it has attribution to the user that's creating or editing them, they can submit them for review, or depending on who you are, you can submit them through our Terraform process to get it promoted into either a test or a production-like environment. But then we understand not only what's changing, but who's changing what and what it's going to look like in the overall flow. And then that traceability allows us to measure and monitor the impacts that new skill has on the overall execution of the workflow. Now the Skill Studio part of it is built. The overall execution of the harness I just described is, we started building it 2 days ago. We spent 6 weeks doing all of our markdown library creation. And then at the end of the month, the plan is to have the harness done, running in a pilot. And then, given the BHAG nature of this thing, without much human involvement in the flow, but more as like a wrapper and an audit function that's managing the skills library component of it, will be a July process.
It's fantastic. You've been on both sides of the table. You were in consulting, managing director, partner at Accenture for a couple of decades, and then here you're kind of leading AI at Cox. Now, how do you see the whole system integrator business changing? Will it change? Will it not change? What would you expect from new breed of system integrators that you may or may not be getting right now?
Yeah, I don't. I find myself just based on my network and all my friends in consulting. I find myself at the other end of this question quite a bit, and I don't know that I have an answer for too far into the future. A lot of people want to hear some pontification about where AI is going, and it's interesting because Anthropic and OpenAI and these folks can't tell you what's going to happen 6 to 12 months from now, given how fast that they're going. And so I don't necessarily feel like I can if they can't. But what I can tell you is that on the enterprise side, there's companies all over the place, the world, are going to be forever full of human beings that are going to operate at different levels of desire and urgency. And so I do feel that there's going to be a long-standing need for help in the enterprise, whether it's to continue to produce the things that they're producing or get them produced in a new way. And there are going to be companies that don't need the help, and then there's going to be a lot of companies that do need the help. And I think some form of systems integration will continue to exist or persist in those environments. So the question for me is not will they exist, but how will they operate with a different set of expectations wrapped around them? And we're wrestling with some of the same stuff here and haven't yet come up with a great answer.
Got it. And I know we're almost on time. A friend a couple of weeks back sent me the resume of this a person, CS grad from a top 5 school in Chicago, based out of Chicago, and having trouble finding a job. I know you earlier referred to some of it had to do with the remote nature of the problem, remote work and things like that. But what kind of guidance would you have for somebody getting out of school, getting into a job right now?
Yeah, I think I had breakfast this morning with somebody, and they were asking a similar question. They're not early stage career. They're somewhere in the middle. And I said, what I don't think is happening pervasively right now at a minimum is once you get past, like, let's assume for a second that your resume has some of the requisite qualities that, the scanning functions and maybe a recruiter is looking for. There's going to be a screening conversation at some point. And I think you'll win or lose at the moment of the screen going forward for at least, the foreseeable, right? And my advice to this gent this morning and my advice to your friend who's in Chicago would be, whether you're in a job or you're not, most people in a job have constraints because they've got a fixed set of activities they've got to go work on for the job. And what that eliminates is the free time that they need to go build all of the portfolio and experience that rounds themselves out. And so they've got to go put their heads in a space of learning their way through that cycle that I described, project manager, product manager, engineer, and getting to the point where they can build their own applications or build their own agents that can then show up in that screen as a portfolio. So imagine your friend shows up to the next screen and they say, hey, let me talk you through a few things because I have ideas for how I can walk into this job and use AI to not only make myself more productive, but free myself up to help with thinking about how to extend the value proposition of the job that I will do. And if you want to see some of that stuff in action, here's 2 or 3 things that I've built that are either germane to the job itself or that are representative of the type of things or thinking that I'm going to have to apply in the job. And then show the portfolio, either demo it live or explain the applications and say, you can go see or use these things if you want. And then say, here's the challenges that I worked through as I created this portfolio. Here's what I learned and how I evolved as a human, how I walked myself around that wheel and ultimately became what I think is the best current version of myself to help use AI to create this 10x version of me that sets me apart from the candidates that you're also assessing. If someone else is doing that, I'd be surprised. If someone walked in and showed me their portfolio and showed me the forethought of how AI is going to apply to their job and the portfolio they've already built that demonstrates their readiness for the job, I think that person's going to have a big leg up.
No, I agree. That seems like a very rare occurrence in a job interview.
Yep.
Thank you, Eric. This has been fantastic. Really appreciate you taking your time to do this.
Yeah. Brittany, I appreciate the time as well. It's been amazing to get to know you, and I appreciate the time on the podcast.